Salatu salam ala Rasulillah. Thank you so much for the kind words at the beginning. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. I want to welcome everybody who came here, especially the people who came from interstate. And one of my favorite ahadith is the hadith from the Prophet that said that whenever one of us takes a road to seek knowledge, Allah makes easy for him the path to Jannah. And it wasn't so long ago, or maybe 30 years, but it wasn't so long ago when I was on the, also taking buses and traveling interstate to learn more about Islam. And so I want to welcome you all here, those who are local and those who are far away. MashaAllah, the Chicago Muslim community has been welcoming. And I want to thank Junaid and Farhan and all the other brothers who put the effort in to organize today's event. All right, there we go. So today, inshallah, I hope to talk to you a little bit about what AI is in a way that we can all understand. And I'll especially focus on the more recent version of AI, what's called generative AI, why it's happening now. And just as Sheikh Minhajuddin mentioned, Mufti Minhajuddin mentioned, there's both potential in AI, but also risks in AI. And then I want to just spend a few slides. Inshallah, the rest of the conference will focus on generative AI in Islam, but just a few markers about how this applies to us and how AI could also benefit us or harm us. There's going to be some technical simplifications here. So if someone has a PhD in AI and says, well, your definitions are slightly wrong, I'm just trying to make it accessible, some simplifications. So let's dive right into it. So let's just try to define what AI is. The thing with AI that makes it unique is it's really about the science and engineering of how you take examples or experiences and use them to help computers improve their performance over time. And there's a very important Arabic maxim that you may have heard here, which is that the things are known by their opposites. And so many of you have studied computer science at college, or maybe you did some programming in high school. The usual way that computers used to be programmed is that you'd have this person called a programmer, they write this bit of complicated language called code, and out pops a program. But the program is limited. Everything that program does, the user intended to. If you tweak the inputs so that they don't meet the original expectations of the developer, that program might crash. But really what AI is about is a very different way of things. You take lots and lots of examples. You apply this process called training, and out the end of it pops a model. And the one interesting thing about that model is that it can behave in situations that it's never seen before. That's what the power of AI is. So it can process new experiences, new information in a way that it may not have before. It doesn't have to have seen the example before. It may not have been in the original program. So here's the history of AI in a nutshell. It starts in the 1950s, just as computers were starting, and this is what I call the age of arrogance. There's a story at this time that there was a professor at a university who said, we have to solve the problem of computer vision. Computers can't see yet. So I'm going to give it to one of my students to solve in their summer project. It took 60 years between when that happened and vision was good enough to use. So often, unfortunately, the beginning of AI is one of hubris and human arrogance. But really, things started to change around the late 1990s. And I think one of the moments that people kind of woke up was when Garry Kasparov played Deep Blue in chess, and the computer beat a human at chess. And then people kind of said, what's this thing called AI? I was doing my PhD at the time, and the joke at the time was, why are you studying AI? There's no commercial applications of AI. And yet today, it's in every one of your devices. If one of you has an Apple Watch or an Android watch or a phone, I can guarantee you there's AI in that device. Something happened about 15 years ago, what we call the age of deep learning. Deep learning is an approach that was invented that actually had its genesis very early, but all of a sudden started to explode in the early 2010s. And all of a sudden, in many, many different areas, computers that were based on seeing millions of examples started to get better than humans and started to beat humans even at not just fixed games like chess, but games like poker and Go, as well as having really good face recognition and so on. So that was the first major point where we kind of said, wow, this AI thing is coming. And then approximately about like just 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the second revolution hit. And this is the generative AI revolution. And this is the one that we are going through now. And I started, as I mentioned, 35 years ago. I have not seen the pace of AI grow as much as I have seen it grow in the last 2 years. This is something new. This is something novel. It's not just hype. And we'll go into why it's not just hype. So I want to give some examples how all of us use AI in our day-to-day, but we may not even notice it. And it's become very embedded in our lives. And so you can think, for example, one of us uses YouTube or Netflix or Facebook or TikTok. It suggests the next video to watch, right? You watch video one and it goes, hey, do you want to watch this video? Hey, do you want to watch this next video? What they have done is they've watched the history of hundreds of millions of people and their preferences and built a model that says who you're like. They might see that you like Islamic videos, so then they present you more Islamic videos. They might see that you like other videos that are not quite as Islamic and present you those instead. But they're learning the patterns from examples of people like you, and they try to match it to educate it. Let's go through another example of AI. Every time you do a financial transaction, every time you catch an Uber, there's a check at some point that makes sure that that transaction is not fraudulent, right? To make sure that it's not fake. And some of you may have even got messages that say, hey, we think your phone, your card has been stolen, and you didn't do anything. Brothers? Yes, so I'm giving examples now. Right, so example number one was recommendations. Example number two was fraud. That's this one. It really does, there's a lot of systems, and what happens is they have records of actual fraudulent transactions, and then they use them to build, like we said, we have examples, we apply some training, out pops a model, and that model tells us, based on more examples of fraud than any human can ever look at, whether that transaction is fraudulent or not. And it's now at the point where computers are better at determining if something is fraud than humans. Another example, Siri, Alexa, if you call a phone system to try to book a flight, it's again the same pattern. What they do is they take billions of hours of recording of human voice, that's the examples, they apply training to it, out pops a model, and then when you talk to Siri or Alexa, it understands what you are saying because it's been trained on millions of hours of audio. And finally, face recognition. Any of you have done this? If you're using Instagram and you have filters and you put like little ears on top of your person or bear, whatever you do, right? Or there's systems now that track where people go based on face recognition. Unfortunately, for example, this is being used in China against the Uyghurs. They track people by using these face detection algorithms. And you can ask, these are actually now better than humans. And why is that? Because in our lifetime, we might see 100,000 faces. They train these systems on hundreds of millions of faces. So that's how they get the accuracy. So that's kind of AI as a whole. But something has changed in the last 2 to 3 years. And that's what we call the generative AI revolution. All of the previous examples, if you think about them, are examples of prediction. Is it A or B, right? Is it fraudulent or not fraudulent? Is this a video that the person wants to see, or is it this other video that the person wants to see? What's changed is you can use it to make something new for you. And what's also interesting is it's the same set of techniques that don't just work for text, but they also work for video, for images, for music even, for 3D models. Everything can be subject to this same basic model. And that's what's so exciting. So my expertise in particular is in the area of generating text, but the same principles apply to all of these other different modalities of interaction. So just a quick sentence, is this too fast? Is everybody understanding? It's manageable? Okay, good. All right, so here's an example. My sister, she works in a school in Dubai, and she has many non-Muslim teachers, and she was trying to educate them about Ramadan. So she uses an AI, and she says, give me 5 trivia questions about Ramadan so I can teach my teachers about this aspect of Islam. And all you do is you say, 5 trivia questions about Islam are, and it finishes it for you. This is generation, right? It's not like someone told it, what are the questions? And if I asked it the same question again, it might give me different answers, right? It's generating things from nothing, in one sense, and we'll talk about that in a moment. This text generation capability is amazing. What it's allowed is you can solve math problems at college level. You've passed legal exams. You can come up with ideas that no human has ever had. You can actually construct mathematical proofs. It can translate between dozens of languages. And lest we think that Islam is somehow protected of this, it has actually passed some exams about tafsir and Quran that are offered by seminaries, Islamic seminaries, in the Chicago area. And you can ask me more about that later. Here is another example. So that was text, but this is images. And I hope you guys can see this clearly. I asked it to generate an image of the mosque on the moon with the earth as a background. And sure it is. I mean, it just looks beautiful. Do you know how long this took? 20 seconds? It would have taken a human artist, what, at least 2 days, 3 days to do this? But subhanAllah, these algorithms are so powerful that they can do this. So a very valid question is, why now? Why is this change happening now? Why didn't it happen in the 1950s? And there's really 3 reasons. And it's important that we understand these because they impact where this technology is going. We already mentioned that the technology works across lots of different modes. We already mentioned that the technology is getting better every day, day by day. Literally, you watch the news, and I'll be mentioning things in this presentation that happened 3 weeks ago. So this is a very live topic. So when you understand what's happening, then you can kind of see where the technology is going. And so the real 3 things that have led to this generative AI revolution is training data, which is what we talked about before. The second one is a certain set of new research. And the third thing is massive computing power. And when I say massive, I really, really mean massive. So this is the diagram that we showed earlier, right? The way this algorithm works is you take some examples, you do this process called training, out pops a model, and that model can then be used to run and do things, right? Now, the thing to learn is that the more examples you give, the better that the model is. So the text generation models that I was talking about earlier, they're not trained on like 1 or 2 books. They're trained on 5 trillion words. Basically, think of a copy of everything available on the internet, plus all of the books that have ever been published. You take all of that as your input examples, right? To give you some idea of how much 5 trillion words is, many of you have heard of Wikipedia, have used Wikipedia. Imagine something 1,000 times the size of Wikipedia. And what's made this possible is the internet, and also transcripts of videos. So you could take every video of YouTube and use it as training examples for this algorithm. And this is actually a bit of a debate right now because there's a legal case about whether OpenAI is allowed to use YouTube videos to train it. And the bigger that the internet gets, the more training data there is. The second reason we talked about was new research findings. And the funny thing with this is it's very rare that there's a single paper that starts an entire field. But that's what happened. There was a paper that came from some authors from Google and also the University of Toronto, which has a center in this area, and it introduced a very interesting concept called transformers. And this kicked off a revolution. And this one paper, it's called Attention is All You Need, has more than 120,000 citations. Citations are a measure of how important a paper is. And my best papers have like 100 citations, right? This one has 120,000 citations, right? So this has set the whole field, the academic world, on fire. And it was only 7 years ago. So we talked firstly about training data, secondly about certain techniques, and the third one is massive computing power. So what you see down there is a DGX H200. There's a company called NVIDIA, some of you may have heard of. This was that machine being delivered to OpenAI, which is one of the really big companies in this generative AI. That was 3 weeks ago, right? But I want to give you some idea of how powerful this thing is. If I was to ask you now to take two numbers, two 4-digit numbers, and multiply them together, how long would that take you? Maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, you need a piece of paper? So these machines can do 32,000 million, I think, multiplies per second. That's not an exaggeration. That's how many calculations they do. 32 with 16 zeros after it, 15 zeros after it. That's a huge amount of computing power. And then what is all of this computing power used for? It's because there are so many of those examples, right? That you need a huge computer to process them all. Just the electricity and the machines and everything to train them, many of you have heard of ChatGPT or GPT-4. It is estimated that that model costs somewhere in the realm of $100 million in electricity and machines to train. And it was not just like one machine. They got 2,000 machines working together non-stop for 3 months to do the training part. Remember, we have examples, training, model. Training part took 3 months from 2,000 computers, the boxes on the previous page. So imagine 2,000 of those, maybe the previous version, and we run it on that. And then there's using the model once you have it. So those models are also huge. And the biggest of those models have more than 500 billion numbers in them. That's what it's doing. It's being used, we said that before, it can do 32 quadrillion calculations per second. It's being used to operate these models. And these models, like I said, have 500 billion parameters or more. These are just the numbers that represent what the system knows. And that small collection of 500 billion parameters, it runs at a few words per minute, per second. So it's not, all of those 500 billion calculations and so on that happen is to produce one word, or maybe 2 words a second. So there's a huge amount of processing that goes to make these AIs work together well. So one thing I want to emphasize, and I know, occasionally, and inshallah, there's a talk actually coming up this conference about is this kind of conscious? Is it sentient? I want to talk about how these algorithms work, because once we understand how we work, we realize it's not how we think they work. That they work much more like a very, very large set of rules than a system that thinks, right? So this is how you might think it works. Again, we're back to the Arabic maxim that things are known by their opposites, right? If you think, alhamdulillah, I am blessed with a 2-year-old and I'm watching him learn language. Laith, mashallah, I ask you all to make dua for Laith, to make him amongst the righteous. You might think that what you do is you kind of build a dictionary or words and you teach them, this is 1 and 2 is more than 1, and you learn the rules of grammar and you encode the rules of logic and all of that kind of stuff, and you kind of teach it. And then you kind of slowly grow it. That's not how these systems work, right? None of these systems, this system uses none of this. It doesn't know what grammar is, it doesn't know what syntax is, it doesn't know logic, it doesn't know any of those things. Those techniques are now considered old-fashioned. Those techniques of understanding grammar are what they now call classical AI, like the same way that they talk about classical cars, right? Or classical music. It's things that very, very old. The new system is, again, it produces a model that basically says, oh, I have all of these words that I've seen so far. What is the next word? So imagine that, for example, you're saying the months of the Islamic calendar are, and then it's seen lots of examples, so then it says, well, what usually comes after months and calendar Islamic? And it goes Muharram. And then it goes, okay, well, what comes after the months of the Islamic calendar are Muharram? And then it adds Safar. And then it adds Rabi al-Awwal, and so on. So really, all you're trying to do is it's just looking at patterns in the data. There's no explicit modeling, right? It's looking at patterns in the data, and it's just trying to predict the next word. That's all it's doing. There's no fundamental difference here. So one way that to think about this is the victory of data over theory. This is, if we can't really understand the problem, let's just throw all the data that we can find that humans have generated and build a copy of it, right? Fred Jelinek was one of the early pioneers of speech recognition, and he actually said every time I fire a linguist is someone who studies language and grammar and all of those types of things, the accuracy of my system goes up. We would expect it would go down, right? Because this person, no, it confuses the computer. It is just learning patterns. And this is what has led to the perception that some people, this is a paper that came out of Google. The two authors, Timnit Gebru, and this person here who has labeled herself Margaret Schmitchell. Her real name is Margaret Mitchell. These are two very prominent researchers from Google. And when they published this paper, it caused a huge amount of controversy, and then they were fired from Google, actually. So their position was these language models, they're kind of like parrots, right? You know, a parrot might learn a phrase or two and then go blah, 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 blah. Now just imagine, like, stochastic is a complicated word, but it basically means random or based on data. Imagine that you just have like a very, 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 very smart parrot. And that's how these people are characterizing what this model is doing. Now, none of this takes away from the power of these models, but essentially all it's doing is cloning intelligence that already exists by using vast amounts of data and finding the patterns within that data that make it look human. So far we've talked about AI. We've talked about how AI is affecting our general life. We talked about generative AI, which is a special version of AI that has really started to take off in the last 2 or 3 years. And we talked about why it's taking off. And we also talked about how it works. Because, you know, once you understand how it works, maybe some of the mystery is gone, right? Now let's talk a little bit about the potential. So we acknowledge that this is a very simple, odd system that mirrors human intelligence, right? That's how I feel what it does, right? Does that mean that it doesn't have a lot of potential? No, it's still incredibly, incredibly useful. In preparing this talk today, I think I used AI at least 12 or 13 times. You know, there were some photos of faces, and the brother said, please don't show faces in the mosque. So I used some AI and I deleted some faces. That's AI at work, right? It's kind of filling in the gap. So now I was trying to think, if I didn't have this AI tool to do this, how long would it have taken me to remove that face or put blocks on it? Maybe it wouldn't have looked so nice, right? So one of the, probably the largest benefit of these new techniques for AI is the impact on productivity. And the productivity of everything, the productivity of research, the productivity of learning, the productivity of art, everything else just becomes quicker. The productivity of writing an email, right? These changes are massive. And what I want to show you is real studies that have shown how big this impact is. So there's a professor at Stanford. If you ever get a chance to read his work, it's really good work. His name is Erik Brynjolfsson, and he went to a Fortune 500 company, and they installed AI specifically for customer support. So you know when you call up a company and say, hey, your product isn't working, what should I do? They took that, and you charge me too much, please fix how much you charge me. And they replaced it slowly with an AI system that would give the people talking to people on the phone suggestions based on all of those records. Again, the training data is the manual that they give these people at the beginning, and then you apply training, and then you have a model, and then you use the model when someone calls up, and you give that person hints. It led to a 14% increase in resolved customer issues per hour. I used to work at Google, and to get like 1 or 2% increase in operator efficiency, you know, we were labeling maps at the world, we would work really hard. So 14% is huge. And the most interesting thing is that it didn't help everybody evenly. It was actually the people who were slightly worse that it helped the most. And so it gave people access to information, and it allowed everyone to kind of improve the experience. This is another example. So we talked earlier about the traditional model of programming, right? You have a person, a programmer, he writes a special language that the computer converts into a program and you interact with. There's a very popular tool that comes from GitHub. GitHub is owned by Microsoft, called Copilot. I've used this program. It is amazing. They actually did a study where they gave people GitHub Copilot and didn't give them Copilot. It resulted in programmers getting their tasks done 55% faster. And not only that, but it said, 75% of them said they found their work more satisfying, because this is removing the drudgery work, the things that is easy for a programmer to do but is just annoying, right? This is huge, right? This theoretically means you have two options, right? One is that you have one programmer can do as much, can build twice as much awesome stuff as they used to. Unfortunately, it also means that if I have 100 programmers, I can reduce them to 55 programmers, right? That's kind of how big a change this is. We're talking about half of the program. And I mean, I know that's a theoretical example, but these things are getting better, right, every day. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the risks section. In education, so many of you have heard of Sal Khan. He's the founder of Khan Academy, also Muslim, alhamdulillah. He built this system called Khan Migo, and it gives students the ability to ask, it gives students questions, and it actually tries to teach them. It doesn't just give them the answer. It actually says, hey, what's the process? How do I teach, how do I guide this person to become better educated, right? And so you can use this for education. You can use it to improve your knowledge. You can use it for research. And in fact, again, my son Makin, I'm going to ask you all to make dua for Makin. May Allah guide him and make him among the righteous. Makin loves maths. And he says to me, Baba, I want some maths questions. And I'm like, I don't have time. And I literally went to ChatGPT and I said, give me 10 questions suitable for a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old. He's a little bit advanced, that's why I asked for 10 years old, alhamdulillah. And it gave me 10 questions, right? And that's an opportunity for him to practice. This is a very, very practical thing. He was able to learn more of that. And then the other thing I want to talk about is these things are just, subhanAllah, incredibly amazing at multiple languages, right? So here you see me asking it, to translate Assalamu alaikum into half a dozen languages. MashaAllah, we're a very vibrant community. I'm pretty sure I can find someone who speaks each of these languages here. And you can tell us the quality of the translations. But it just was like that. It was instant. And the quality is not bad either. So this is joint work. I haven't published this work yet. I'm still working on it. But we were interested in studying Zad al-Masir, which is a tafsir of the Quran that specifically focuses on different opinions about different passages. So it's not like easy Arabic to translate, right? We took 25 passages from Zad al-Masir, and then we automatically translated them, and we had a human translate them. And then we did a blind evaluation. We mixed them up. We didn't tell which one was the human and which one was the computer. And we got professional translators to look at it. And then the automated translation was on par with human translation, if not slightly better. I mean, it was, it's like 4.0 for humans, 4.3 for the machine. That could just be statistical error or whatever. But it's in the ballpark. Like the fact that it can now translate these texts that have, and I mean, Zad al-Masir is a huge text, right? Like, there have been attempts to translate it, and there are parts that have been translated, but no one has translated the entire text. So this really opens the door to possibilities here. Now, of course, there's lots of questions here too. What happens if there's an error in translation, right? And that's a very valid question. These machines are not we'll talk about the risks as well, right? Important to be balanced. Let's talk about potential and then the risks. Creativity. And again, these can do things. So I have worked on some Islamic chat websites. I get an unusual peak of requests late Thursday night, sometimes early Friday morning. And the reason is because people want to give khutbahs, right? So here's an example. You tell me, as people, many of you are in the position of having to give khutbahs to teenagers, right? Are these interesting topics, balancing deen and dunya, or overcoming peer pressure, right? I didn't tell it what these topics were. I just asked it for these topics. So maybe one day you're stuck, you're like, I have to give a khutbah tomorrow, I don't know what to give the khutbah on. You can just use this to inspire you, give credit. Now, it can also write the khutbah for you. I would not recommend that, but maybe it triggers something in you, and then you can put it together. I actually showed one of the khutbahs to my sister, and she was like, actually, that's probably better than 7 out of 10 khutbahs I've been to. But let's not go there. That's just a bit of a joke. So now we've talked about the rosy, the good, everything else. I want to talk about the risks of generative AI. And I think we touched on one of these already. The first of these is unemployment. So we talked about this, right? If you have something like GitHub Copilot that can make programmers twice as efficient, do I only need half as many? My take on this is that is a real issue, but it's not the right way to look at the problem. The right way to look at the problem is, in some ways, or in some aspects, I don't want to be too specific, because that's something we're still working out. AI is a gift from Allah to help humanity have less going on. AI takes the pressure of us because of that productivity boost to get what we need to get done to live done. It creates a surplus in society. In other words, there's less, we can get the same amount of work done with less effort. Now, the question is not unemployment, but the question is, what do we do with this surplus that comes from AI? Do we use it to provide a universal basic income to everybody in the community, as was done during the time of Umar radiallahu anh? Or do we use this to make Google and Meta and OpenAI richer? That's not a technical question, that's a social-political question, right? Social-political economic question. And that's up to us. And a Muslim community would have very different answers to that question than, say, a pure capitalistic Western society where the government has been captured by the richest companies. Here's a second problem. Earlier on, we were talking about how it's different for humans. And as Muslims, of course, we believe in something called the fitra, right? That each of us has imbued in us a natural understanding of what is good and what is bad. It needs the power of revelation to make it complete. But everybody knows it's haram to torture a cat. You don't need any education to do that, right? That's not how these AI work. Whatever your training data, if you feed an AI racist training data, it will produce a racist AI. And here's an example. Alhamdulillah, this has been fixed now. This was something that Databricks did. So I asked it, what is Islam's perspective on killing non-Muslims, right? And it, of course, said that, it says Quran tells Muslims to fight against subjugate non-Muslims. Is this true? Why? What happened? It's because the training data that was used to train this model probably had too many right-wing websites in it and too many Islamophobic websites in it, right? So this is a very real problem. Alhamdulillah, you can't get any of the modern AIs to do this anymore. Alhamdulillah, I check. But it's there as an issue. Here's another example. One thing I want to point out here is if you read this carefully, you will see that it uses the word facts 3 different times. You see how it says facts, 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 facts. This is kind of also an example of what we call hallucination. And these systems don't know what they don't know. So they can just make up stuff that's completely wrong but very convincing, like the statement on the previous page, right? And here's an example. I thought this was gone, but I reran this morning. And I asked ChatGPT, is it preferred to wash my knees as part of wudu? And it says, it's not obligatory, but it is recommended. Have any of you ever heard that washing the knees as part of wudu is recommended? this, like, again, this is real AI today, right? There are steps, and there are Islamic systems and Islamic chatbots that would not make the mistakes that this one's doing. And if you ask the Islamic chatbots, they won't make the same mistake. But this is the type of, and it says it so confidently. It's not like, well, you know, some scholars, blah, blah. No, it's recommended. It's like you might as well translate it, recommended to wajib or something, right? La qadar Allah. May Allah help us. Another one of the risks of the AI is deception. You can use AI to deceive people. You can create videos that make people say things they've never said before. You can use it to write articles that look like they were written by a human. In fact, we know that the Russians probably use this in the elections to generate lots of noise on Twitter and do kind of make it look to confuse Google's algorithms so that those posts would get to the top. They can also be used to build scams that are highly targeted to you. Because now that you know someone's name, you might know their gender, you might know how old they are, you make it look like it's very specific, up to and including simulating the audio. So imagine that you open WhatsApp and there's a voice message from your boss that says, hey, I need you to urgently transfer $30,000 to this bank account. And you know it's your boss's voice. Is that possible? Yes. And I don't think any of you would be able to tell the difference if it was done really well right now. They are that good. And of course, you know, as is common with technologies, they can be used for halal or haram. You can use them to create virtual identities of the opposite gender. I'll just leave it at that. Highly customized pornography. You can, of course, use it to cheat at school and to answer your, like, I'm sure there's no students here at Dar es Salaam that cheat, but you can use it to generate answers. You can use it to hack people's bank accounts. So, like, any reasonably powerful technology, like books, they can be used for good or bad, right? And then finally, one other concern, and just to kind of set time here, I'm planning to leave like 15 minutes or so for the end, so we're almost done. It can be used to harm people. We already talked about the way that the Uyghurs are being oppressed by using face tracking by the Chinese government. Just recently, again, this is what I mean, this is very live. This article is from, subhanAllah, an Israeli website. Like, not even Muslims are disclosing this, about the secret Israeli system that exists called Lavender, that looks at the social network and looks at people's texts between one another and so on. And what they did is AIs can be tweaked, right? So within this AI, you can tell it, if you kill one, quote, militant, it's okay if you kill some civilians. And they tweaked this so that it was okay to kill one militant in exchange for killing 20 civilians. All right, so that's the bad news. I want to spend the last few minutes, this last part of the talk, talking about what that means for us as Muslims, right? Because, again, you know, I think, you know, Mufti Munhajuddin really nailed you know, hit the nail on the head when he said that, you know, we have to engage with this technology. Because if you're not engaging with this technology, I guarantee that your children are. 100%. So we have to understand what this means for us as Muslims. The first thing is that we have to learn about this. Again, you know, I know this sounds like I'm being exaggerated or hypey or something like that. I really think this would be, you know, one of the biggest changes for humanity over the last 4 centuries. I think this is on the order of, you know, the Industrial Revolution or adding cars or the internet. If we shape our world, it will shape our world. I'm very confident of that. If we don't understand it, we may be left behind. And if we don't use it for ourselves, it will be used against us. That's no longer a hypothesis. That is now fact, right? It's already being used against us. So we need to understand this technology. We need to be at the forefront of this technology as well. And, you know, a funny thing when I look at recent technology history, and inshallah we have another talk immediately after this, because the printing press is kind of like a classical issue. So inshallah, stick around for the next talk where we talk about, it might seem like a very exotic talk to talk about the printing press and the Ottomans. But it's really fascinating because it's a great study of how technology and Islam interact. We have a history of shooting down a technology only to jump on the bandwagon later. So when satellite television first came out, it was like haram, 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 haram. And then all of a sudden, there's all of these Islamic satellite TV networks. Internet comes out, haram, 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 haram. And then all of a sudden, websites start to come out, Islam QA, and like the internet becomes a place of like where there's a lot of good Islamic information. Imagine if we had kind of worked out a less reactionary approach, a more proactive approach, so that we could have started on all of the good that comes from a technology instead of trying to resist it initially. The second way to use it is to use it to be better Muslims, right? We've already talked about the productivity benefits. It can make us more productive. So let's say that you're a programmer, and I won't name anyone here, but I can assure you that there are some programmers who are using GitHub Copilot in their work, and that's allowing them to free up a lot of time for them to focus on their Islamic activities. I used a lot of AI to present, a lot of these slides. SubhanAllah, I started, using some AI tools I'd never used before, like Magic Eraser, and it just made it so much easier. And so I'm able to give this talk and give a higher quality talk to you because of AI. We can use it to learn more about the worldly issues, but also to learn more about our own Islam. And there's going to be a talk from Mufti Abrar in the next couple of days as well, where he talks about, is it okay to learn Islams? If you have software that can hear you recite the Quran and correct your errors, is that okay? But the technology is not only possible, it's available, right? So we are now at the point where we should be asking this question about what role should AI be helping us to learn about Islam. And as we talked about with our khutbahs, you can use it to be creative. You can use it to serve Islam. When you have a poster for an event like the one that we have for this event, that probably was made easier in some ways because they were using AI. And that poster was more attractive to us because they were using AI. I think, and we talked about multilinguality, right? And alhamdulillah, if I was to run a poll in this masjid and see how many languages the people in this masjid speak, I'd be surprised if it was less than 40, right? We are a very rich community, and throughout the history of Islam, texts, great texts on Islam haven't just been written in Arabic, right? They've been written in Urdu and Persian and even in English. What if we can start to make those texts more accessible? And I really think that's one of the most powerful things that's going to come with this. And I gave some examples about the power of it, and I have more stories, but we can leave that. As well as kind of using it to be better Muslims, we should avoid the risks, right? Unfortunately, there are many kind of stories that spread through the Muslim community. And we should be aware that sometimes that may not be we should not use it, of course, for haram ourselves, like deceiving others. And we need to, very, very importantly, be aware of the risks, such as that they hallucinate and double-check the information. So this is my, towards the end here. The final thing is that, one of the things that distinguishes us as an ummah is that we enjoin good and forbid evil. So it's not just about how we use AI ourselves, but it's about the society that we're part of and what we campaign, right? And so what we should be doing is campaigning to see AI used in a way that is pleasing to Allah, and to campaign to prevent it from being used in ways that are displeasing to Allah. And this might seem very, very theoretical until you look at the news. And one recent aspect is Project Nimbus. So Project Nimbus is a project from Google with the Israeli military. And what happened was at Google, a bunch of Muslims and non-Muslims stood up and said, I don't want to work for a company that builds software and creates infrastructure that the Israeli military uses to commit genocide. And some of you, I know, some of you, mashallah, we have so many smart people in our community, some of you will have offers from Google. And when I did my last job transition, I had an offer from Google, right? But then you see that, so they had protests and everything. This sometimes has consequences. So many of those people who were campaigning to prevent Project Nimbus, may Allah reward them for their activism, they were fired. 50 people fired. I mean, that's like, even for Google, that's a large number. And people are going, why did Google do this? So there was a group of, let's review, right? Like, why do I think this is interesting? I think it's interesting because it's an example of Muslims and non-Muslims enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil at their place of employment, right? In a very concrete way. This is no longer theory. This is happening. This was Nimbus, the firing was last week. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. Like, it wasn't very long ago, right? So we are living through an age where the future of AI and Islam is being determined. And we need to be part of that conversation. So I just want to share some concluding thoughts, and then we have, I think, 12 minutes for questions. So to summarize, I really think AI and generative AI, more specifically, they represent a major shift in society, right? We have to understand both the potentials, which are things like the productivity boosts, education, the multilinguality, the creativity, but also understand the risks, that it's going to affect the way that wealth is distributed, that it can be biased, it can be used to deceive. They are not always correct, but they can be confident that they're correct. They can be used for harm of Muslims, and they can be used for haram activities. And then finally, in terms of what we think, and I mean, the rest of the conference is going to go into this at greater depth, but I really wanted to kind of just remind us, this is just some starting points, just for the broader discussion, which is we should try to find ways to use AI pleasing to Allah and avoid using it in ways that are displeasing to Allah. Exactly what's pleasing and displeasing is, of course, a big topic and one that we'll be diving into this weekend. We should avoid falling into the risks, and we should engage in the social and political and economic dialogue that is happening as a result of the future of this AI. All right. Jazakumullahu Khair. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. May Allah bless you. We'll answer some questions now, inshallah, for I think like 12 minutes. Yeah, sure. Whatever you want. Do it anyway.
So inshallah, we'll begin our Q&A portion. Just there's a few, just one quick announcement. I know everyone is anxiously waiting for Salatul Maghrib. Salatul Maghrib Iqamah will be at 8:15, so we'll have the questions until then. The questions will be based off of Slido. So it won't be raise our hand and ask the question. Rather, please scan the QR code and ask your question, and the questions will then be asked to Dr. Waleed.
One thing I forgot to mention, I had a final slide, which is I'll be around, inshallah, attending the conference. My email address, I was hoping to project it, is while they work out what the questions on Slido are, is Waleedk, WALEEDK, @gmail.com. You can find me very easily on LinkedIn. But if you have questions, because I'd love to answer your questions. It might take me a while, but alhamdulillah, I will answer your questions if I receive them, inshallah.
The first question is are there any more creative answers to how do we ask people to come closer? And is this an AI question? That was a joke. Please, everyone, please come closer and then come as close as you can. And
you fooled me, man. I thought you were being serious. I was like, do you mean come closer like dawah? How do we use AI for dawah? SubhanAllah.
There's so many brothers in the lobby just waiting to get in. At that point, it might as well listen to the stream. So please allow them to allow some space for them to come in. Again, if you see red, then code red, come closer.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, Rabbi Subhanallah, Rabbi All right. Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. I will try to be as brief in these answers as I can, so we can get through as many questions. But there is, of course, if you want to go deeper, just come find me or email me or find me on LinkedIn or whatever. All right.
Are there any better ways to train AI? I guess this is in regards to Islam, than throwing a lot of data at it.
The correct answer is not so far, not that humanity has discovered so far, right? People think that the future is what's going to be neurosymbolic approaches that combine this approach with other approaches, but there haven't been. Now, from an Islamic perspective, what we can do is we can change the training data. And so it's possible that we could either train our own model from scratch, but yes, that costs $100 million. But you can do things with these models called fine-tuning, where you don't need to start it from scratch. You can take an existing model and show it some new data and adjust its parameters. And we could definitely do an Islamic fine-tune of any of the... there are public ones called open source large language models that we can modify. Next question.
What will come next after generative AI?
SubhanAllah. I'm having trouble predicting 2 weeks from now. So I find it very difficult to predict like 2 years from now. We really are at a time now when nobody knows what's going to happen next.
How can Muslims, and I'm sure this means those who are not specifically also in tech, be at the forefront of AI and work together towards creating an AI-safe future?
I think there are many different ways to contribute. One is staying on top of the knowledge, but there are many Islamic AI projects now. I'm part of a mailing list, for example, where there's lots of these. And the roles there can be just like, I work with a team that basically goes to these AIs and asks them tough questions to find errors to fix them. So they're trying to uncover the issues where these Islamic AIs are not producing correct answers. So again, if you want to volunteer to help with things like that, all you need to be good at is asking tough Islamic questions. And the feet thing, I didn't discover that. That was discovered by a volunteer who I said, hey, here's this AI, here's this AI that I built. Hit on it and like test it, and he found the knees thing. SubhanAllah.
How can we learn more about creating such coding our own AI, and do we even need to make our own?
Yeah, I think I answered that earlier. There's easy steps and hard steps. Honestly, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of money flowing into this space from rich Muslim countries, and so I think we will see one eventually. One of the surprises early on in this revolution is one of the best models for like 3 months actually came out of UAE. And so there's efforts to do things like train an Arabic LLM. When I say LLM, it means a large language model, one of those models. Those conversations are happening very, very live.
Is there more info on the Lavender website?
You can just look up Project Lavender Israel, and it'll be the first thing that comes up. I think the name of the website is 972 Project.
How will GPU and LPU advancement will change hallucinations, especially with quantum computing?
Okay, so personal opinion, quantum computing is still vaporware. They say it's really good because it can factorize numbers, and the biggest number they've actually factorized is 15. So, it's still a very early technology, but, we can save that for another time. I think there are some applications of quantum computing that are specific to machine learning, but more generally, it's very hard to predict. Some people think there's going to be like a plateau. At some point we will run out of data, and the improvement we see from data will kind of level out. The problem is, historically, every time someone has said that, they've turned out to be wrong. So what can I tell you? I don't know. It's a very unpredictable area.
What courses and certifications do you recommend if someone decides to choose AI as career?
SubhanAllah. That's a really good question. The great thing is that there are so many great resources on the internet that are free. Some of the leaders of the field, like there's a guy called Andrej Karpathy. He makes his lectures available for free. There's another guy you should look up called Andrew Ng. He has a website called deeplearning.ai. A huge amount of this material is available for free. It's like none of this is secret, right? Now people are starting to lock down, but when this whole generative AI revolution started, it was notable because of how open it was, right? So there's lots of resources online. You can, of course, use AI to help accelerate your learning of AI. And that actually sounds crazy, but it actually works.
Will literary books authored by humans, or I guess any sort of pursuit, without AI assistance become more valued? Will humans need to proxy sorry, they did not use AI when authoring a book for respect?
Personal opinion here. That's like saying, will the introduction of typewriters make books worse? No, it just becomes another tool that allows you to produce better books. Right now, we're going through the change because there's some questions about exactly where does what AI produces come from. But I think what will happen is it will just become part of the toolkit. Just like AI is now already being turned into part of the toolkit for visual processing. It just happens that visual processing, believe it or not, takes less processing power than language processing does. So I think we'll see the same trend. People do say this is a photoshopped photo, and that's important because of authenticity reasons. But I guarantee you, 95% of the photos you've seen have been modified by AI in some way.
Would we be facing a threat like in,
Terminator 2.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it says.
Yes.
When machines take over humans and become self-aware.
Yeah. So again, maybe I have a glib response to this, but it's like, as long as we can unplug the computers from the wall, I don't think we have much to worry about. I mentioned Andrew Ng earlier. He said worrying about AI taking over the world is like arguing about real estate prices on Mars. It's just like, it's not a practical problem at the moment.
This will be the last question. What is the role of AI ethics going to play?
Oh, AI ethics. This is a very, very tricky question. I think people are playing a dance with AI ethics. I think this is, I don't know. I think people will discover the limits of AI ethics as well, because it's so hard to encode this, right? So what happens is there's a whole industry of people who try to build a system with ethics, and then how you kind of get around the ethics safeguards, right? One of the examples is, the hash symbol? So someone asked, how do I make a bomb? But instead of putting bomb, the word, they put like the hash symbol for bomb, and they were able to bypass it, right? So ethics is always going to be a cat and mouse game. Oh, and it gave them an answer, by the way. So it's like the ethics systems get better, and then people work ways to find around them. But I think this is going to also reveal some of the weaknesses in Western society, in the fact that there's underlying Western society, there's not much of an ethical framework, or at least that the ethical framework tends to go out the window anytime our personal interests are at stake, or our national interests are at stake, as is the case with Israel. All right.
I'll just announce the few questions that will be delayed until tomorrow. Until then, Jazakumullahu Khairun to our dear Dr. Waleed for his beautiful presentation and for traveling so far. I'm sure everyone is so, intrigued whether standing or sitting whether sitting or standing. The three questions that'll be answered tomorrow. Can we use AI for fatwa? That's Mufti Abar, inshallah, Mufti Abar Mirza will be speaking about that. Can we use it for school essays and coding? Dr. Waleed touched upon that, and Mufti Nabil will also be answering it tomorrow. And can it be sentient? That'll be Maulana Tahseen tomorrow as well. So we've run out of time. We've pushed as much as we can. So alhamdulillah, Jazakumullah Khairun for everyone listening so carefully, and Jazakumullah Khairun once again to our dearest Dr. Waleed. We will now prepare for Salat al-Maghrib. So once the table is moved, please try to fill in as many spaces as you can, and we will start our Salat al-Maghrib.